Welcome to the Real Estate Update Podcast, where we focus on homebuyer education because knowledge is power. I'm your host, Paul Centopani, and joining me is John Dickson, President and CEO at Aon Edge Insurance Agency. John, thank you so much for coming on.
Pleasure's mine, Paul. Glad to be here.
Now, we're keeping it light today and discussing the climate crisis, specifically flooding. First, let's talk about you. What does Aon Edge do, and how long have you been working in this space?
So Aon Edge, for the past 12 years, has been a managing general agency focused on filling a significant coverage gap in our country. And it does this by delivering private flood insurance solutions, creating alternatives for customers to find different ways to make better decisions about their flood risk and protect their families, their loved ones, and what matters to them most.
Okay, that's very important work, considering the globe is on fire, literally and figuratively. The oceans are heating, glaciers are melting, storms and the resulting damage, like we're going to talk about, they're becoming more extreme. And, the decades of profits over people on the planet brought us here, but that's a conversation for another podcast. John, what should homeowners and buyers consider when evaluating their flood risk?
Well, I think you touched on it just now, though. You're thinking about today's environment and the challenges that people are facing today. One of the problems we have with flood insurance, we use a mapping system that in many instances is woefully out of date, sometimes by 10 years or more. And when you're looking at just that resource to help decide whether or not to make a decision today about buying flood insurance, you're making today's decisions based on yesterday's information. What homeowners should be thinking about today is, what does today's risk look like? How has risk been changing? How has the environment been changing that potentially exposes my property, my home, differently than it did yesterday? One of the things that we say constantly, you look at those flood insurance rate maps, the program that they were born from, the National Flood Insurance Program, started in 1968. And the flood insurance rate maps, when you zoom out from the country, it looks like a capillary system across the United States. And the capillaries are the riverways, or the waterways of the country. If you're close to a waterway, you're exposed. If you're not, you're not, according to these maps. What we've seen recently is the greatest risk from flooding is from intense rainfall events. And it doesn't just rain close to rivers or rain just close to the shoreline. It rains everywhere. And so today's flood risk is greatly different than yesterday, and really appreciate the opportunity here, Paul, to reach more people and help explain that situation.
And Realtor.com just released its 2026 climate risk report and showed that 23.1% of U.S. homes, nearly 1 in 4, face severe or extreme climate risk. And those properties are valued at $11.2 trillion. Now, flooding accounts for 6% and 3.4 trillion of those totals. Does that sound about right to you?
I think by some counts, you could say those numbers are light. One of the things that we struggle with, and I touched on this at the very beginning, we are faced with an incredible coverage gap in our country, particularly around the risk of flood. You think about, call it plus or minus 100 million single-family homes in the U.S., less than 10% carry coverage to protect them against flooding events. Regardless of how you think about the risk of flooding, again, looking at recent history, significantly more than 10% of that population of homes are exposed. And so the numbers that you have, I think directionally are correct. Again, by some accounts, could they be higher? Could there be more exposure out there than what even Realtor.com is showing today? Absolutely. Regardless of what measure you use for homes, real estate, properties that are exposed to catastrophic risk, I think it's pretty well established there's a gap between how many of those assets are protected and then how many of those assets are exposed. And we need, as an industry, as a community, as a country, to continue to work to close that gap, to provide more protection for these valued assets.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'd mentioned that those flood maps, the capillaries, they're out of date to what the current situation is. And I know the FEMA Review Council had a meeting in May and they proposed something. Can you kind of just go over what the latest is with that and what it would mean for real estate?
There's several proposals that came from that. And really, thanks for bringing that up. The FEMA Review Council is looking at the functionality, the operations of the National Flood Insurance Program and assessing, is there a better way? We think about that coverage gap that persists in our country. What can be done? What policy reforms can be made to help narrow that gap? And one of the things that the FEMA Reform Council has looked at is taking the National Flood Insurance Program, the federal source of flood insurance, which today is by far the largest source of flood insurance in the country, and turning that into a residual market. So you think about the FAIR plans that we see in some states, or Citizens Property Insurance Corporation, the state-run insurer that operates in Florida, having FEMA at a federal level act as the backstop, if you will, for flood insurance. The second proposal in the FEMA Review Council recommendations was that the NFIP basically operates as a clearinghouse. And so that there's a process whereby private carriers, private capital can remove risks from FEMA and write them with private capital. This would help depopulate, de-risk FEMA and help accelerate properties to a more actuarially, more data-supported rate level than they get today under the FEMA program. So both of those, then there's a number of other measures and the recommendations that came from the FEMA Review Council output. Those two primarily that I mentioned are intended to help reduce the size of the NFIP program, help return that program so that it can operate profitably. The program has run at a significant deficit since its inception. And then also the other piece here that I think is probably the most important piece is help accelerate capital stepping into this marketplace in a smart, responsible, sustainable way to help insure more homes.
Okay. And another number to throw at you, the NFIP, they dropped 4.5% or about 170,000 of its coverages between May 2025 and May 2026. Largest decreases came in Texas, Oklahoma, Idaho, Mississippi, and Alabama. Could you explain kind of what the NFIP is and why these coverages are being dropped?
Sure. So the NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program, is the federal source for flood insurance. And as I mentioned, it's been in operation since 1968. In the 80s, they adopted what they call the write your own aspect. This is where carriers that write homeowners insurance can tap into the federal program to issue flood insurance on that carrier's paper backed by the government. That's by and large the program today. Most of the business written in the NFIP is written through those WIO participants. Interestingly, the states that you mentioned, Florida, Idaho, Mississippi, and Alabama, is where you're seeing great gains in the private market. And what I would tell you, you actually need to look at the whole picture. If you look at the policy count time over time, the change in policy counts with the NFIP, and you overlay that with the policy count change in the private industry, what you'll find is that overall today, we're insuring more homes against flood than we did yesterday. And this is the intent of what happened with the Biggert-Waters Flood Insurance Reform Act in 2012, that was then followed quickly by the Homeowners Flood Insurance Affordability Act the following year. Those two measures, massive omnibus reform measures, also opened the door for private capital to step in and help out and create options and create alternatives and, in summary, have the industry reach more people. And we're seeing that bear out.
Well, nice. Yeah, options are good. And you know, you have your choice between the NFIP, private flood insurance. How would or how should a homeowner choose between those two?
Well, it starts with understanding your risk and knowing what you have exposed, what risk you're willing to bear as an individual. I mean, you sort of start the question by asking, what if the worst happens? Am I prepared for that? Can I absorb that? And in many cases, when we're talking about these events, the worst is you lose your home. And so start there. Are you equipped to recover if your home gets washed away in a significant event, a flash flooding event, or an incredible, 1 in 500 year flooding event? For most, the answer is no. And so then you have to start to quantify that risk. What are the source of flooding? Where am I most exposed? And then you have to think about what level of coverage do I need? For example, in the NFIP, the federal program for a single family home, you can buy up to $250,000 to cover your home. If your home happens to be worth $1 million or worth $700,000 or $800,000, you can still only get $250,000 of coverage from the NFIP. So that's another question that you need to think through with you and your family and the folks that you trust. How much limit do you need to protect what's most important to you? Do you have more than one building? What sort of lifestyle attributes do you need to protect? If you're displaced from your home for a period of time, are you prepared to pick up those costs, or would you prefer that your insurance carrier cover those expenses while you're displaced in time of catastrophe? So working through these different scenarios about quantifying and understanding the risk and then thinking about how it impacts specifically you and your family and your property can help you think about what option fits best for you. And the one thing that we tell homeowners, property owners, consumers with great consistency: talk to your insurance professional. The insurance professionals are the ones that are spending the time to understand innovations in the industry. What's new? What markets are responding better than others when crisis happens? And the other thing that I say, tongue in cheek a bit, is if you talk to your insurance professional and they tell you they only have one option, go find another insurance professional because there are alternatives out there.
That is good to know. That is good advice. And obviously, cost plays a big factor in all this. And the median annual flood insurance premium is projected to hit about $1,300 by the end of this year, and that is nearly double the $700 from the end of 2022. So that's a pretty big jump in a few years. Is there an inflection point anywhere, or will premiums just keep ballooning and coverages dropped as flooding risk worsens?
So it's an interesting statistic, and I think what you're citing is the premium cost that we're seeing from the federal flood insurance program, and you have to layer into that stat the change in methodology that they adopted a few years back called risk rating. They called it risk rating 2.0. This was a new way to think about flood insurance risk that for the first time allowed the federal program to rate based upon property attributes, location, geography of the property, some things that historically the government did not use to price risk. And as a result, there were some changes, some prices went up. The other thing too, the federal rates have long worked under a body of subsidies that have kept rates artificially low. Another one of the analogies that we use frequently is the insurance industry, in many respects, serves as a reflection of risk to help people understand their exposure. And if that mirror is distorted, then you get an imperfect understanding of risk that leads you to make bad decisions. If the mirror shows you a true reflection of your risk, then you can make well-informed decisions. Now, for our program, we're actually seeing average premiums for single-family homes go in a different direction. We've been hovering around $1,200 as our average premium for years. Today, our average premium is about $700. That's not because we've imposed significant rate decreases across the program. What's happened is we've become more effective talking to lower risk homes about why it's important they rethink their decision around flood insurance. And as we bring in more homes of lower risk, we have a more sustainable portfolio that can bring the average cost down for everybody. And eventually, those cost declines can benefit every member of that portfolio of risks.
John, is flood insurance always a requirement?
No, it's not. We go back to those maps that I talked about that sometimes need a little dusting off and updating. Those maps basically define who has to buy flood insurance and who doesn't. So we've drawn these bright lines across across the United States, and we call the one side of the line a special flood hazard area, which is meant to define where flooding has a 1 in 100 likelihood of it's a frequency of 1 in 100 years. It's a 1 in 100-year flooding event. On that side of the line, you have to buy flood insurance if your home is financed by a federally backed mortgage. On the other side of that line is called the non-mandatory purchase area, and you don't have to require you're not required to buy flood insurance if your home is located there. Interestingly enough, it turns out water doesn't know to stop at the lines on these maps. And this is part of the challenge that we've had is that many times, NFIP data will bear this out, we're seeing more losses happening in the non-mandatory purchase areas than we are in the areas where people are required to buy flood insurance. Roughly about 10% of the country sits inside of that special flood hazard area where insurance is required, flood insurance is required as a condition of that federally backed mortgage. But as we see time and again, many more people are exposed to the peril.
Yeah, water doesn't care about those made up lines.
No.
Now, would you ever recommend, I know this is kind of a weird question to ask you, but would you ever recommend someone forego flood insurance altogether?
I mean, I think academically, I could certainly see where that could factor into the conversation. There are situations, well, for example, your home is completely paid off and you hold the risk on the properties that you own. You own a number of properties and you want to manage risk sort of like a small insurance company. That individual doesn't necessarily need flood insurance. I understand, you have to make tough decisions sometimes about, where to hedge and where to double down when it comes to risk transfer, risk management decisions. By and large, unless you're willing to have your home suffer catastrophic damage and then you pick up that bill 100%, you ought to have the conversation. You ought to understand what's out there, at least see what the cost is, and work again with your insurance professional. Have them start to quantify the risk. How do they rate it compared to your neighbors, the next community over, the home that you owned a few years back? You have these reference points that can help guide your decision making better.
Now, states with the most climate risk typically correlate with higher rates of mortgage delinquency, and delinquency rates actually doubled in Florida and Texas from January 23 to September 25. What are some ways to avoid delinquency both before and after a flood damages your property?
Well, that's one of the things about having insurance in place is that now you don't have to come out of your pocket for things like, hotel and living expenses while you're displaced. The repair, the when you bring on the mitigation specialist to help stop the spread of damages, defeat mold, dry out the place with fans, and then to recover, to rebuild. These bills add up quickly, and demand surge is real. When floods happen, it's not a single house that's impacted; it's a community. These events have big footprints. Just the nature of the catastrophe recovery cycle, prices surge for lumber and drywall and contractor services. Your insurance is prepared to absorb that inflation. A lot of homeowners are not. And so you want to think about maintaining current with your loan obligations, put the risk on your insurance company instead of holding it yourself. And that's one big way to do that.
Now, are there things that you can do to your house or surrounding property to help fortify it from flood damage?
Absolutely. And again, this is where it gets very exciting about what's happening today. The innovation is not stopping. The investments are not stopping in this space. For example, there's a company now that makes non-gypsum drywall. So you can install this drywall in your man cave in your basement, fill it with water, drain it, and you can't even tell it was wet after a day. There are vents that you can install that can allow water to flow through your house in a way that won't displace the house from foundation. There's all sorts of and there's actually ways to think about land use and the plants that we have in our surrounding area that have the ability to absorb water at an incredible rate. In a retrospective, they looked at what happened in Hurricane Harvey. There was a native plant that was largely removed as they developed the area and paved it over to build and to grow and to add capacity for people to live. Well, it turns out that this native plant had the ability to absorb 10 times its weight in water. And when Harvey hit, that capability was not there. And so think about that. Think about the plant life that can help make the area more resilient. Think about hardening and resilience investments you can make to the structure itself.
All right. All right. And John, last question, and I ask this all my guests. What is your top advice for first-time home buyers right now?
So for a first-time home buyer, I think the most important thing is go through the process with your eyes wide open and don't be afraid to ask questions. There's a lot of people, a lot of resources out there that can help guide you. And again, it really comes down to making the best decisions you possibly can for yourself today and for your future self. And you do that by educating yourself, equipping yourself with data, understanding, connecting yourself with knowledgeable, experienced professionals that you can trust and that can help you make the best decision for you and your family.
All right. Yeah. Ask questions. Listen to the experts. That all sounds right to me. John Dickson, thank you so much for coming on.
Paul, it's a pleasure. Thank you.